Hello everyone, I'm Brian. Today I'm reacting to Dr. Shashi Tharoor MP. I don't know if I said it correctly. Britain does owe reparations. So, for me, my opinion on reparations. Generally speaking, I don't believe in it, but at the same time, if we can figure out who has been, if we can figure out who has been damaged by this, then I do believe in it. So I guess it's like, it depends. I guess more so depends. If you it's a little bit more difficult in an American sense because they don't know who's descendants of who. Then at the same time, you got to come up with the fact that there's been interbreeding in America. So one just because there's a lot of people owners that has slept with their who they own. I mean, how does that work? But also at the same time, I don't think there's a very large population of those people, just in case for YouTube stuff, that came to the United States. I mean, there's a lot, don't get me wrong, but relatively speaking, I think it was very few compared to the rest of the world. And if you can find out who those people are, their descendants and all that, I don't see why not. But then you got to ask yourself the question, like, how much is fair? I don't know. I don't know how to calculate that. And that's where another question comes into place. Like, okay, if we can figure out who it is, that's great. Can we figure out what's a fair price? You know what I'm saying? And right now, for me, let's just say for me, example, if my family was in that situation, I probably would say no to reparations, just because the only thing, in my opinion, for me personally, is fair treatment. That's it. That is all. No hindrance, no benefits. Fair treatment like everyone else. In a sense, respect. That's all. You treat me like you treat everyone else. That's respect enough. But then you gotta, people saying like, well, it's very complicated for sure, absolutely. And this is the only thing. Find out if you can find out directly and prove that they're in fact affected by it, and then what is a fair amount. I think those are fair questions to ask. But this one, it's an entire country. That's a different story. I don't know if is it. Do you think it's the whole country, or do you think it's particular parts of the country? That's kind of the interesting thing. I don't know if Britain controlled the entirety of India. I doubt that, but then again, I don't know. Let me know. And if it's just a part of the country, do you think, if you believe that Britain owes this part of the country reparations, like how much and what part? And do you think people who migrated from north or from other parts of the country to those areas, do you think they should get it too? And that's the biggest thing about reparations. It's so difficult to figure out. Again, I don't know the history between Britain and India. I've only studied, you could say, American history. Hopefully, me blowing my nose into the mic doesn't register. Anyways, so you guys have to let me know. And here are the questions I would ask, and tell me if they're fair enough or not. Did Britain control all of India? Did Britain affect all of India? Yes or no? Then if it's not all of India, what parts of India? Then you have to ask, okay, does Britain have to pay all of India or just the parts of India? And then what would be a fair reparation amount? That, again, I don't know. Honestly, that's the most difficult thing. Once you figure out who is affected, how much is owed. And then would you say, and let's just say they figure out what a fair price amount is, and who's affected. Would you be willing to say, in a sense, destroy Britain's economy just to get the reparations? Or would you be like, well, obviously, while we deserve reparations, but we don't want to destroy our economy, so just pay over time a fair amount, kind of like that. I'd assume most people would want that. Or do you want, say, no, Britain, you give us all the money now, and who cares about your economy? Obviously, I don't think anyone's going to pick that. But anyways, yeah, I think those are the questions that I would ask. And I know there's talks about reparations in America also. This is going to be a long intro. But I think the Indians have been paid reparations too. But the black people, the reason why I say black versus Africans is because I tend to separate them because there is a separation. The people that are like white people here, they're European, but we don't call them Europeans. They're white. Black people here, some are Africans that migrated over here, and they should not be considered black. But black are the ones that's been here since slavery, and figure out who. Where was I going with that one? But anyways, figure out who was affected, and I think L.A. or it's not L.A. California is talking about it. I don't know if it went through or not. That's their state. All it is just redistribution of wealth because California collects the taxes from people and then just gives it back to whoever they're going to give it to. But then the question is that, well, is that going to solve the problem? Well, will the people who are asking for this reparations are they going to be satisfied now? If the entire economy is not fair, the reparations is not going to mean anything just because it's not going to help them. It's going to help them temporarily, but then the future generations are going to suffer. And this is the biggest thing for me. It's the fact that, again, fair treatment and opportunities, fair treatment, fair whatever, that is payment enough. But that's very hard to do. It's not something that you see, but, a lot of people come over here because of opportunities, and that's the only thing I can ask for, really. Anyways, really large opening there. Hopefully it was not nonsense. And please, if you think there's stupid questions, by all means, let me know in the comments below. And if you want to answer them, please let me know, because I'm curious. I really don't know how do you calculate reparations. They say billions or trillions of dollars, but where is that coming from? Is that all assumptions, kind of? I know there's some calculations there, but is it calculated appropriately? Is it does it account for inflation? I'm sure a lot of that is accounted for. I think they probably figured out a pretty good number. So anyways, let's hear what he has to say. That's a long intro. Maybe my thoughts will change after hearing this too. I'm kind of curious.
Madam President, and gentlemen, ladies of the House, standing here with 8 minutes in my hands and at this venerable and rather magnificent institution, I was going to assure you that I belong to the Henry VIII School of Public Speaking. That, as Henry VIII said to his wives, I shall not keep you long. But now finding myself the seventh speaker out of 8 in what must already seem a rather long evening to you, I rather feel like Henry VIII's last wife. I more or less know what's expected of me, but I'm not sure how to do it any differently. Perhaps what I should do is really try and pay attention to the arguments that were advanced by the opposition today. We had, for example, Sir Richard Ottaway challenging the very idea that it could be argued that the economic situation of the colonies was actually worsened by the experience of British colonialism. Well, I stand to offer you the Indian example, Sir Richard. India's share of the world economy when Britain arrived on its shores was 23%. By the time the British left, it was down to below 4%. Why? Simply because India had been governed for the benefit of Britain. Britain's rise for 200 years was financed by its depredations in India. In fact, Britain's industrial revolution was actually premised upon the deindustrialization of India. The handloom weavers, for example, famed across the world, whose products were exported around the world, Britain came right in. There were actually these weavers making fine muslin, light as woven air, it was said. And Britain came right in, smashed their thumbs, broke their looms, imposed tariffs and duties on their cloth and products, and started, of course, taking the raw materials from India and shipping back manufactured cloth, flooding the world's markets with what became the products of the dark and satanic mills of Victorian England.
Real quick, that one. Yeah, I mean, obviously they did that with the United States as well. Britain, trying so hard to tax the people. This is I want to say an argument that I had with a friend of mine, where we kind of thought about, what Britain colonies versus Spanish colonies have done. I will say Britain colonies have done far better. I think, again, prove me wrong here, please, if I'm wrong, that Spanish tend to go and grab everything from the whatever areas they got and leave it barren. Where British does try to do that, but they also they don't literally leave it barren, because the United States itself was doing fairly good, but of course Britain was taxing the crap out of them. Taxation without representation, and don't know if that's something that happened in India. I'm sure it did, but the people in America were actually British people, because there was not really there were natives, but they weren't really associated with the people necessarily. They traded and whatnot, but it's their British expeditionary force or colonizers that they were taxing them. They were taxing their own people really harshly. So I don't know what Britons did with the India. I wouldn't doubt that. Like, smash, that doesn't seem right, because then you're destroying the production there. If you want to make money, you let them work and you get the product and you sell it for a profit. Why would you destroy your workhorse, as you would call it? People who are building stuff and making stuff that are very good. But the taxation part, that's Britain all the way through. Look at what Spain has done, and at least, again, I talked about this with them. We don't know history too much, but we just look at certain areas that Spain has colonized, and it hasn't been great. I don't know what Spanish colonial areas that has prospered. I don't know if any, but in terms of Britain, you look at America. Maybe that's about it. Maybe one. Well, South Africa too, I believe. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying they're great or anything, but just relatively speaking, it's very relative.
That meant that the weavers in India became beggars, and India went from being a world-famous exporter of finished cloth into an importer, went from having 27% of world trade to less than 2%. Meanwhile, colonialists like Robert Clive bought their rotten boroughs in England on the proceeds of their loot in India, while taking the Hindi word loot into their dictionaries as well as their habits. And the British had the gall to call him Clive of India, as if he belonged to the country, when all he really did was to ensure that much of the country belonged to him.
Also, not sorry to keep pausing it, but I keep thinking of all these movies too, and same thing with I love watching Ip Man, and in that one, is it Japan? No, Britain and China as well. They did certain things that Britain had very strong control over. I believe it was Britain had a really strong control over China in certain areas as well, taxation and just everything. Don't get me wrong, like Britain in the past is, they did what they did. That's the way it was in the past. Not excusing it, we have to look at reality. Any country that occupies another country, obviously they're going to try to take everything from that country and feed the motherland, you could say. That doesn't give them an excuse, but that's just factually true. If any country tries to take over another one, they're going to try to reap the benefit as much as possible and let the people there suffer, because it's not them.
By the end of the 19th century, the fact is that India was already Britain's biggest cash cow, the world's biggest purchaser of British goods and exports, and the source of highly paid employment for British civil servants. We literally paid for our own oppression. Mm-hmm. And as has been pointed out, the wealthy Victorian British families that made their money out of the slave economy. 1/5 of the elites of the wealthy class in Britain in the 19th century owed their money to transporting 3 million Africans across the waters. And in fact, in 1833, when slavery was abolished, what happened was that a compensation of £20 million was paid, not as reparations to those who had lost their lives or who had suffered or been oppressed by slavery, but to those who had lost their property. I was struck by the fact that your Wi-Fi password at this union commemorates the name of Mr. Gladstone, the great liberal hero. Well, I'm sorry, his family was one of those who benefited from this compensation.
Again, I'm not exempting them or anything like that, but again, these are the realities of the past. It's not to say it's good or bad, but it is the realities. Um, Anytime a country or a group of people gets conquered, they're the ones that end up being suffering. But again, these are the past, and hopefully remains in the past. Although I'll say there are certain areas in modern day where this is still kind of a thing.
Staying with India, between 15 and 29 million Indians died of starvation in British-induced famines. The most famous example, of course, was the Great Bengal Famine during the Second World War, when 4 million people died because Winston Churchill deliberately, as a matter of written minuted policy, proceeded to divert essential supplies from civilians in Bengal to sturdy Tommies and Europeans as reserve stockpiles. He said that the starvation of anyway underfed Bengalis mattered much less than that of sturdy Greeks. This is Churchill's actual quote. And when conscience-stricken British officials wrote to him, pointing out that people were dying because of this decision, he peevishly wrote in the margins of the file, "Why hasn't Gandhi died yet?" So all notions that the British were trying to do their colonial enterprise out of enlightened despotism to try and bring the benefits of colonialism and civilization to the benighted heathen. I'm sorry, Churchill's conduct in 43 simply one example of many that gave a lie to this myth.
Oh, real quick, wow. I'm sorry, I'm probably going to pause a lot because he talks a lot of subjects all really quickly. I didn't know that about Churchill. That kind of sucks. I was kind of curious about how India was affected with World War One and Two. I don't know if they were in one, but apparently they are definitely in two. Man, that is kind of crappy, though. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, obviously the soldiers needs to be fed, but good lord, I don't know. I really don't know. Like, was there really a severe lack of food in Britain that they couldn't supply their soldiers, and like, or just to take them, it's like, oh, just stacks and stacks of backup, just in case our soldiers need it. It's like, that's really kind of crappy. I mean, again, whenever I think of anything, I think of the grand scheme of things. It's kind of almost kind of like Stalin whenever he was it how to say, in the sense, whenever he kept I guess the what do you call it, there's a city that didn't get evacuated in time, and he actually, yeah, he didn't let the civilians in a sense evacuate, thinking that the soldiers would fight harder because the civilians are there. It's like, are you serious? That is not good. And obviously, I mean, many people during World War II suffered starvation as well, but still, though, to do that, I don't know. I definitely need to see what how World War II and what exactly happened directly with India. Like, learning about, that's kind of crazy that freaking Churchill said this. Definitely got, oh my gosh.
As others have said on the proposition, violence and racism were the reality of the colonial experience, and no wonder that the sun never set on the British Empire, because even God couldn't trust the English in the dark. Let me take World War I as a very concrete example, since the first speaker, Mr. Lee, suggested these things couldn't be quantified. Well, let me quantify World War I for you. Again, I'm sorry, from an Indian perspective, others have spoken of other countries. 1/6 of all the British forces that fought in the war were Indian. 54,000 Indians actually lost their lives in that war. 65,000 were wounded. Another 4,000 remained missing or in prison. Indian taxpayers had to cough up £100 million in that time's money. India supplied 70 million rounds of ammunition, 600,000 rifles and machine guns, 42 million garments were stitched and sent out of India, and 1.3 million Indian personnel served in this war. I know all this because, of course, the commemoration of the centenary has just taken place. But not just that, India had to supply 173,000 animals, 370 million tons of supplies, and in the end, the total value of everything that was taken out of India, India, by the way, suffering from recession at that time and poverty and hunger, was, in today's money, £8 billion. You want quantification? It's available.
Okay, real quick with that one. Obviously, you're going to have to, I mean, I don't know, like, what would happen if Britain didn't ask for, or not ask, I guess demanded India for help, if Britain lost and then the Axis powers won, what would happen to India at that point? If I don't know who was. I know Germany, Italy. I can't remember what the other Axis powers were, but let's just say India didn't help, and then the Allies lost. What would happen then? Would Germany have done any better, or would have they just done the same thing? So you have to think about that kind of stuff. But it seems like with that, I don't know how much Britain contributed to that, but it sounded like freaking India was kind of carrying it a little bit for Britain right there with supplies and everything. And trust me, supplies are a major things in war, especially food and clothing. Are you kidding me? If your troops are not comfortable, because obviously there's no real comfort in war, but if you had nice clothes and good food, oh my gosh, your troops will be so much happier. And with all of that, man, British people should be grateful for that, because good food and good clothing means a lot to, I'm sure, the soldiers out there when their clothes are falling apart and water's getting in or whatever, soaking, or nasty clothing and ripped up. But yeah, good lord, that's a lot. 8 billion pounds. So this is the thing. So yeah, so now I know there's calculations. Whoo boy. But anyways, let's continue.
Second World War.
Oh, here we go.
It was even worse, 2.5 million Indians in uniform. I won't belabor the point, but of Britain's total war debt of £3 billion in 1945 money, 1.25 billion was owed to India and never actually paid. Somebody mentioned Scotland. Well, the fact is that colonialism actually cemented your union with Scotland. You know, the Scots had actually tried to send colonies out before 1707. They'd all failed, I'm sorry to say. But then, of course, came union, and India was available, and there you had a disproportionate employment of Scots. I'm sorry, Mr. Mackenzie has to speak after me. Engaged in this colonial enterprise as soldiers, as merchants, as agents, as employees, and the earnings from India is what brought prosperity to Scotland, even pulled Scotland out of poverty. Now that India is no longer there, no wonder the bonds are loosening. Now, we've heard other arguments on this side. There's been a mention of the railways. Well, let me tell you, first of all, as my colleague, the Jamaican High Commissioner, has pointed out, railways and roads were really built to serve British interests and not those of the local people. But I might add that many countries have built railways and roads without having had to be colonized in order to do so. They were designed to carry raw materials from the hinterland into the ports to be shipped to Britain. And the fact is that the Indian or Jamaican or other colonial public, their needs were incidental. Transportation, there was no attempt made to match supply to demand for mass transport, none whatsoever. Instead, in fact, the Indian railways were built with massive incentives offered by Britain to British investors, guaranteed out of Indian taxes paid by Indians, with the result that you actually had 1 mile of Indian railway costing twice what it cost to build the same mile in Canada or Australia, because there was so much money being paid in extravagant returns. Britain made all the profits, controlled the technology, supplied all the equipment, and absolutely all these benefits came as private enterprise, British private enterprise, at public risk, Indian public risk. That was the railways as an accomplishment.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't doubt that. Obviously, you know, why when you conquer a land, why put your people into risk? All your people will be supervising and making sure they do the work, and kind of have, you know, who cares about their health? They're not you, they're not your people, so let them do it. If they're not going to do it, you know, discard them or punish them for not doing it. Yeah, that's fairly obvious.
We're hearing about aid. I think it was again Sir Richard Ottaway who mentioned British aid to India. Well, let me just point out that British aid to India is about 0.4% of India's GDP. The government of India actually spends more on fertilizer subsidies, which might be an appropriate metaphor for that argument. If I may point out as well, that as my fellow speakers from the proposition have pointed out, there have been incidents of racial violence, of loot, of massacres, of bloodshed, of transportation, in India's case, even of one of our last Mughal emperor. Yes, maybe today's Britons are not responsible for some of these depredations, but the same speakers have pointed with pride to their foreign aid. You're not responsible for the people starving in Somalia, but you give them aid. Surely the principle of reparations for the wrongs that have been done cannot be denied. It's been pointed out, for example, the dehumanization of Africans in the Caribbean, the massive psychological damage that has been done, the undermining.
Sorry, real quick on that one. So the humanization of Africans in
the Caribbean.
I would fact check the story I'm about to say, but from what I heard, the Africans in the Caribbean actually killed all their slave owners. So now there are only Africans in the Caribbean. Do you feel sorry for the slave owners? I mean, I don't know. I mean, they're dead though. I think it's only Africans in the Caribbean now. So yeah, to dehumanize them, I don't think it's right to enslave people, obviously. But you know, Africans now and there are all. I guess they're in a sense running the country now. They killed again. Fact check that if you want. But the last I've heard from can't remember where I heard it from, but the slave overtook the slavers, because there were so many slaves in the Caribbean. They outnumbered the slave owners, and they just killed them all. So no more slave owners down there.
The massive psychological damage that has been done, the undermining of social traditions, of property rights, of the authority structures of these societies, all in the interests of British colonialism. And the fact remains that many of today's problems in these countries, including the persistence, in some cases the creation of racial and ethnic and religious tensions, were the direct result of the colonial experience. So there is a moral debt that needs to be paid. Someone challenged reparations elsewhere. Well, I'm sorry, Germany doesn't just give reparations to Israel. It also gave reparations to Poland. Perhaps some of the speakers here are too young to remember the dramatic picture of Chancellor Willy Brandt on his knees in the Warsaw Ghetto in 1970. And there are other examples. There is Italy's reparations to Libya. There's Japan's to Korea. Even Britain has paid reparations to the New Zealand Maoris. So it's not as if this is something unprecedented or unheard of that's going to somehow open some sort of nasty Pandora's box.
I do, for the Japan one, I talk about this with my other friend who's in political science. I don't know if he ever said that Japan paid reparations to South Korea, but from what I hear, Japan has never apologized to South Korea. That I've heard, and that's the reason why there's still kind of a South Korea doesn't like Japanese people. I mean, to me, while I say, you know, obviously no one in modern time is to blame for anything that's done in the past, and if we can't get past these things, then you know we're forever going to hate each other for things that I was never affected, that you've never done to me, and that I've never done to you. If we keep these things from the very, very far past affecting us today in modern time, we'll never get over it. And I guess, and what my friend suggested was like, you know, all the government has to do is make a public apology. It's like, well, I mean, fair enough, I suppose, but again, you know, I guess my perspective is, I get both, honestly, and I don't know what the right answer is. I guess making a public apology is really not a big deal, but at the same time, they had no control over it. So it's, but I think whenever he speaks of it, it's like the government themselves, even though it's not them, it's the Japanese government that did that, and so it should be the Japanese government that makes the apology and not the people, because the people didn't really have control of who they went to war with and whatnot. It's always been the government, and so the government should make the public apology. But would that be enough? Say the Japanese government makes an apology. Do you think, would that automatically, like, oh, well, you know, they apologize, now we can be best friends? It's going to take more than that. Even if the Japanese makes a public apology to South Korea, I think there's still always going to be that hatred. So whether they do it or not, I guess it could help out some. But I think that hatred is still going to be there for the things of the past. And it's just something that's going to be passed down to generations. And the only way to kind of heal that, in my opinion, is children. And what I mean by that, you kind of have, you look in America where you have racist people with, you know, the one they're racist against, and you have their children playing together, even though I know racist people will try to stop that, but if they go to school together and all that, the children will start questioning why is this person hated? Why should I hate this person? I have fun with him. I enjoy doing things with him. We have so much fun together when we're playing in recess or whatever. So they'll implant that doubt in the mind, where there are some kids, obviously, that will just do what their parents tell them. There's some kids who will do what their parents tell them, but because of what they actually see and experience, they'll have that doubt in their mind. And all you need is just that little seed of doubt for them to change their mind about what they've been taught since they were children. And then, of course, you'll have some children that will hate their parents, or maybe will keep it hidden, but enjoy playing with their friends and stuff of who they're supposed to hate. That's how I see hatred being erased, is by, you can't really erase it for current generation if they have it. You can change their mind, hope to change their ways, but children, generally speaking, they're innocent, they have a blank mind, they have to be taught this kind of things. But if they can have their eyes open by experiencing who they're supposed to hate and seeing it's wrong, that breed of hatred that's being passed down would end.
No wonder Professor Lewis reminded us that he's from Texas. There's a wonderful expression in Texas that summarizes the arguments of the opposition: all hat and no cattle. Now,
I don't know that expression.
If I can just quickly look through the other notes I was scribbling while they were speaking, there was reference to democracy and rule of law. Let me say with the greatest possible respect, it's a bit rich to oppress, enslave, kill, torture, maim people for 200 years and then celebrate the fact that they're democratic at the end of it. We were denied democracy, sir. We had to snatch it, seize it from you. With the greatest reluctance, it was conceded in India's case after 150 years of British rule, and that too with limited franchise. Yes, indeed, ma'am.
The opposition spoke quite highly of Greek and Athenian democracy, on which the West should pride itself, and spoke of liberty and equality in that same name. The Athenian democracy was only functioning because of the slave society on which it was built. That's the nature of colonisation.
All right, I don't think that needs contradiction, not from me at any rate. But if I may just point out, I think the argument made by a couple of the speakers, the first speaker, Mr. Lee in particular, conceded all the evil atrocities of colonialism, but essentially suggested that reparations won't really help, they won't help the right people, they'll be used as a propaganda tool, they'll embolden people like Mr. Mugabe. It's always nice how in the old days, I'm sorry to say that the people of the Caribbean used to frighten their children into behaving and sleeping by saying Sir Francis Drake would come after them. That was a legacy of that. Now it's Mugabe will be there. So this is the new sort of Sir Francis Drake of our times. The fact is very simply, sir, that we are not talking about reparations as a tool to empower anybody. They're a tool for you to atone for the wrongs that have been done. And I am
going to rewind that. Hold on. That's quite important.
Are not talking about reparations as a tool to empower anybody. They're a tool for you to atone for the wrongs that have been done. And I
will say this, okay, reparations as a tool to atone. So what reparations would be needed to atone? If it's money, is that really saying that you're wanting genuine atonement? I think atonement would just be fair treatment. Again, this goes back to what I think. Honestly, I will say this real quick. If I see a particular comment that's, I can't say it because it might change people's minds and what they leave in a comment. I want people to be as genuine as possible in my comments. So, and if it comes up, I will answer it in the next video, hopefully. Well, I guess it'd be kind of hard to do, but anyways, because when this video comes out, there's a thing that I'm hiding because I want people to be Well, I'm sorry to say, but I'm being sneaky here with a certain thing. Anyways, a genuine atonement for me is just fair treatment, I suppose. But if there's a way to, like I said in the very beginning, to find out who has been affected and find out what a fair price for it is, it's not, to me, that's not necessarily an atonement. That's just to, how do I say, to pay back what is owed. That is all it is. Not an atonement at all. An atonement would be to atone for your sins, you must do good. Money in itself, in my opinion, is not good. But it is a reparations, a way to pay back what is owed. I 100% agree with that. Atonement is a completely different story. If you want to atone for your sins, well, there's no one in modern time that has contributed to this. So the only thing I can say is, again, fair treatment. That's it. There's no, I don't believe you can atone for something that you've never done. Fair payment for what is owed. If you can find out with proof that who is owed and what is the fair price, I can't argue for that. I can't argue against it.
I am quite prepared to accept the proposition that you can't evaluate, put a monetary sum on the kinds of horrors people have suffered. Certainly no amount of money can expiate the loss of a loved one, as somebody pointed out there. You're not going to be able to figure out an exact amount, but the principle is what matters. The fact is that to speak blithely of sacrifices on both sides, as an analogy was used here, a burglar comes into your house, ransacks the place, stubs his toe, and you say, well, there was a sacrifice on both sides. That, I'm sorry to say, is not an acceptable argument.
So again, I'm sorry pausing so much, but this is another thing too, where in America, there's, I don't know if this is related or not, but it just made me think of this real quick. Whenever someone comes into your house, in certain states, I believe, if someone comes in their house and they hurt themselves, they can sue you. If they come into your house and hurt themselves, they can sue you for being hurt. What? No. Tends to be, I think it tends to be left-leaning states. It's not very many, I don't believe. Again, I'm not exactly sure now. I think it tends to be left-leaning states that has this. But I don't know for sure. I've heard of this. It's really crazy. I think it's dumb, but anyways.
The truth is that we are not arguing specifically that vast sums of money need to be paid. The proposition before this House is the principle of owing reparations, not the fine points of how much is owed, to whom it should be paid. The question is there a debt? Does Britain owe reparations? As far as I'm concerned, the ability to acknowledge a wrong that has been done, to simply say sorry, will go a far, far, far longer way than some percentage of GDP in the form of aid. What is required, it seems to me, is accepting the principle that reparations are owed. Personally, I'd be quite happy if it was £1 a year for the next 200 years after the last 200 years of Britain and India. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Mad respect for the dude. Absolutely. I mean, like I said, there's nothing wrong with the fact that, if you can find out who's been affected, it's kind of hard to say, oh, who in India? So it's the freaking country. But again, I don't know if it's like all the country or not. Let me know, honestly. And if you can figure out the right amount, then I wouldn't doubt it. So the best thing, that I love that ending, is the fact that the idea of just the government, not the people, because the people at that time had nothing to do with it, but the governments throughout history. It kind of sucks that the current time government has to apologize for something that the government has done in the past. Government may not be an individual person, but it's a body of people. But at the same time, to me, it's kind of weird. But yeah. But fair enough. I do. I mean, I don't know what the I don't know what the amount is. I don't know if the Indian government is actually asking for money back. To talk about how Britain took out a lot from India during the wars, I think that was kind of a necessary thing, although I think it was kind of crappy to take it from the people. I mean, don't get me wrong, like a lot of countries, people were starving, but this was actively done as opposed to just because of the situation. So what I mean, like, it's like people, couldn't farm or whatever because it's just the place got ruined, and it's not that the government's taking away their food that they have. It's just that government can't get to them or whatever it may be. Um, but yeah, I don't know the situation. I didn't even know that Churchill took food from the Indian people. I think that's pretty bad. That was pretty bad because I think America was supplying Britons during World War I. Yeah, I think it was supplying food and stuff too. I'm not sure. I don't know if it was supplying armaments and stuff. But the only reason I know this is because I think there was also Americans. They think they were being smuggled into Britain, I believe, during World War I to help with the war. Because I think there was a blockade from Germany, I believe, and they sunk a couple of ships. And I think trade and stuff was still out. Again, it's been a little bit since I watched like a World War I history video. But if I remember correctly, United States was supplying Britain with supplies, but the United States stayed relatively neutral. They weren't actively in the war, but there were people who were getting into these boats to fight with Britain. So that's one thing. What else? World War II. All I know is from American and Britain side, kinda. Again, I don't know what was going on in terms of Chinese. I think Chinese was fighting against. I think China was allied with the United States. They were fighting against Japan. Again, not too familiar. I know about. I don't know how much America was supplying Britain, but at the same time, the only reason why I will say, maybe it was a necessary evil in some sense that Indian helped out Britain, but I think taken from the people was not the right way to do it. Only because if the Allies lost, considering that Germany very much at that time extremely racist, and I don't know what the leader at that time would have done. They were just killing people left and right. They believed very much into the absolute worst. So I think that's probably a necessary evil to some degree. Like I said earlier, I have been curious. I haven't seen much of what went on during the Middle East and Asia during World War II. I wonder if there's a video out there for that. I watched where America was involved in terms of China, Japan, and that's about it. I know in the Chinese government, I think they blew up a dam and kind of killed a lot of their people to try to stop the Japanese advancement. That's about as far as Asian knowledge I have in World War II. It's like necessary evils that people do to hope to slow the advance and slow the killings, but sometimes ends up being worse. It's what do you do in that situation? I know China was trying to prevent more deaths in the advancement of Japanese, but I don't know if that actually did or did not. But they killed a lot of civilians during that time. You think of all the bombings going on, killing civilians, even America. The two nukes, apparently those were targeted at civilian populations. Again, no country is perfect. But we have to understand realities. It's not to say that a country is good or bad, it's to understand what realities are at the time. Again, colonization was a thing in the past. That's something that Europeans did. I don't know if any other countries did it. I didn't study much of that history. Obviously, being in America, you study what involves America, which is Britain, Spain, France, Germany, because of the wars. That's about it, really. Maybe you learn about Greek and Roman, but ancient history. yeah. Anyways, not much of Asia because America really didn't have too much involvement with Asia. Um, Even though Britain did, but it's just the fact that it was the history that I taught here is obviously anything that dealing with America. So can't blame Americans for lacking the knowledge of other things. It's just that obviously history is a very very heavy subject, and good lord, this is running forever. Oh my gosh, very heavy subject, and you can spend literally America is only like under 300 years old, and you can spend a lifetime learning about America, and it's one of the youngest country. Just imagine learning any other country. You will die knowing nothing pretty much. So you have to pick and choose what you learn. So this is kind of how I look at things whenever people are, oh, you like the knowledge of the world history. It's like, well, yeah, duh, there's so much to learn. What do you expect? You can learn about one state, and even then, probably not enough of a lifetime to learn everything about it. I wouldn't doubt a region in India or in Europe or in Asia somewhere, or Middle East and Africa. Like you can learn, there's so much history in every little part, especially ancient history. Sorry, ancient civilizations. Yeah, there's no way you can learn everything. Anyways, talking too much. So this was really awesome. I love his ending there, and I wouldn't. The reason I appreciate it because what he says is very important. It's the acknowledgement of what has been done that's bad. I think that is very much important. An apology, I think, is very much important. And the fact that it says £1 a year for 200 years goes to show that it's not the money. It's the fact of just acknowledging the wrongs and being treated as an equal. That is my stance always. Well, I will say always for right now. Hopefully it doesn't change. But obviously, I'm not gonna say anything. Anyways, but yeah, my stand, fair enough, and I think it's fair enough to say that Britain does owe India money. If they can calculate a fair amount, and then pay it off over a period of time, obviously, so not to ruin the economy. Obviously, hopefully, Britain and India has a good relationship. I don't know. I mean, why should we not try to work towards a good relationship? Look towards the future of joining hands so that way we're not fighting each other all the time. Anyways, I spoke a lot in this video. Oh my gosh. I think I speak a lot because I'm very passionate. I love the fact that there's a lot of things to discuss here. It's a very heavy subject. There's no easy answers. Please also, if any of my questions, if you want to answer, I genuinely want your honest opinion. I want to say be brutal, but just be as honest as possible, and let me know, because I talk with every one of my friends. Not everyone, but most of my friends who are very much I talk political about. I ask their their stance on it, and I can disagree or agree with them. Anyways, that's it. This video. Good lord, I have talked too much. If you like my content, please consider subscribing. Thumbs up, thumbs down below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next vid.